was really ashamed to say it at the time and ashamed to have to admit it to Harry, especially, because I know.
Prince William wasn't supposed to see it, but once he did, everything changed. It began with a routine maintenance check on a royal transport vehicle, a protocol so standard that no one paid it much attention. But this time, something was off. Hidden within the upholstery of the headrest was a micro-lens barely visible, but very real. At first, the team suspected it was a prank or a tabloid setup. But when additional devices were uncovered in private drawing rooms and even near the children's nursery, the gravity of the situation became clear. Someone had infiltrated the innermost circle of the monarchy, not with shouts, but with silence. When the recordings were finally retrieved and compiled, Prince William insisted on watching them alone. Inside a secured room at Kensington Palace, he sat, pale and motionless, as footage rolled. His voice trembling as he watched his children's innocent laughter captured without consent. His wife reading a bedtime story, and even his own quiet grief after the Queen's passing. These weren't just clips, they were violations. Violations of trust, of space, of bloodline. The emotional toll was immediate and unrelenting. For a man raised to protect both crown and kin, this felt like a personal attack. But rather than rage outward, William chose a different path. He didn't alert the press. He didn't even tell Harry. He initiated a silent probe, one rooted in strategy, not emotion. He needed truth, not drama. Palace staff, sworn to confidentiality, confirmed what William feared most. There had been repeated unauthorized entries into secure locations. Digital logs showed irregular activity during nights when the family was presumed asleep. Nothing had been stolen, no jewels, no artifacts. Only memories, only moments. But as they scoured through hours of footage, a pattern began to emerge. These recordings weren't random. They were specific, pointed, and most disturbingly, timed to coincide with key royal events. Someone had designed this breach with surgical precision. Still, the question remained, who would dare orchestrate something so intimate, so invasive? The answer, William feared, wouldn't come from the outside. It would come from within. And that's when he made the decision. He wouldn't confront anyone yet. Not Harry, not the press, not even his father. He would dig deeper, but quietly, methodically, alone. But what William found next would turn quiet suspicion into undeniable betrayal. These weren't accidents. They were instructions strategically placed, carefully recorded. When the palace began tracing the origin of the footage, the pattern was almost too precise to ignore. Hidden microphones near Charlotte's schoolyard, quietly embedded recorders at private royal dinners, even bedroom conversations moments never meant to exist. Beyond the family had been captured with eerie clarity. This wasn't a case of accidental leaks, it was a trail. And at the center of it stood Meghan. At first, her reflection sessions were seen as harmless, publicized as therapeutic and empowering. She often spoke about healing, truth, and the journey of rediscovery. But now, those sessions appeared strangely rehearsed. Lines she uttered in those moments were almost identical to what surfaced later in Netflix segments. It wasn't vulnerability, it was scripting. The emotional weight of her confessions now seemed like a setup, designed not to share pain, but to package it. Staff within the palace were the first to connect the dots. A conversation overheard by a footman about William's concerns for his children ended up in the documentary almost word for word. It wasn't a coincidence. Palace aides began revisiting private interactions, only to find fragments of their real words distorted in a global production. Meghan's stylist, once trusted and friendly, became an unwitting player in one such moment. She had spoken freely about dress choices for royal events, only to hear her own words, rephrased and repurposed, echo back at her in front of millions. This wasn't just about emotional hurt. It was something far more engineered. William came to a devastating realization. The betrayal wasn't personal. It was operational. This was a campaign. Carefully timed, immaculately framed, and with one outcome in mind, discrediting the royal establishment. The hurt wasn't in what Meghan said, but how it was done, quietly, strategically, without confrontation, as if the palace were a stage, and the royals just characters in a script she already wrote. And yet, The real blow came not from the content, but from what was deliberately left out. The editing wasn't random. It was surgical. Moments that showed warmth, grace, or unity were removed. Instead, the audience was fed tension, coldness, hierarchy. Meghan wasn't just telling a story, she was crafting a narrative. One where she was the heroine, and the palace, her silent enemy. The firm wasn't just misunderstood, it was villainized, frame by frame. But the most incriminating evidence wasn't just hidden in clips. It was buried in contracts. A plain envelope. No name. But inside, a contract that destroyed every excuse. 2. Arrived discreetly, no official stamp, no letterhead, no traceable delivery. Just an envelope slipped beneath the door of a trusted aide. At first, it seemed like another piece of tabloid bait. But as the pages unfolded, Prince William's hands froze. This wasn't rumor. It was real. A legally binding licensing agreement dated nearly a year before Meghan and Harry's so-called step-back from royal duties. A full 12 months before the public exit, the deal was already done. And buried within that deal were the details that shattered every narrative Meghan had carefully constructed. It wasn't just a media contract, it was a blueprint. One clause stood out immediately: explicit permission to use undisclosed royal media, which included voice recordings, interactions, and visual material acquired during domestic engagements. The language was careful but devastating. It gave her and her team the freedom to broadcast intimate palace moments long before she ever packed her bags. Then came the addendum, a separate signed agreement tacked onto the end of the contract that referenced recordings obtained within private domestic settings under mutual understanding. That phrase, under mutual understanding, hit like a blade, because there was no mutual understanding. The palace had never consented. The family had never known. This wasn't a woman looking for liberation. It was someone executing a strategy. Though, document names Meghan's media agency, her US-based legal team, and a set of Netflix executives already under scrutiny. Everyone involved had signed. Everyone knew. This wasn't a gamble or a desperate act of self-preservation. It was coordinated. It was signed. And it was paid for. The financial terms were impossible to ignore. The upfront was staggering over $20 million in advance payments, with bonuses tied to exclusivity and volume of original royal material. Meghan wasn't just speaking her truth. She was selling it. And worse, she was selling theirs, too. As William read through the fine print, he stopped speaking. Every clause, every signature, every number deepened his sense of betrayal. This was no longer a debate about misunderstandings or hurt feelings. This was about ethics, about loyalty, about the sanctity of a family that had already endured generations of scrutiny. He now understood what they were dealing with. Not chaos, not confusion, not even rebellion. This was design, thought out, laid out, signed, sealed, and executed. But before William could act, a whispered conversation across Europe delivered the final blow. No phones, no press, just one wine-soaked whisper that sealed Meghan's fate. It was meant to be an exclusive industry retreat, an off-the-record gathering of media elites tucked away in a secluded Geneva estate. The kind of place where secrets flowed as freely as champagne, and reputations were built or quietly dismantled. That night, beneath the glimmer of candlelight and the fog of expensive wine, a senior Netflix executive let his guard down. His voice, slurred but certain, spilled details no one outside the boardroom was ever supposed to hear. He spoke of the series not as a documentary, but as a masterpiece of manipulation. Footage had been planted, he boasted. Nothing organic, he said. It was built for effect. In his drunken candor, he described how the storyline had been reverse-engineered to provoke outrage, sympathy, and scandal in equal measure. There was no mystery in the editing room, only strategy. And then came the name Meghan, not as a subject, but as the architect. "She's not just a star," he muttered. "She's the strategist, the visionary." That single sentence changed everything. Up until then, there had been room for doubt, for interpretation. But this wasn't secondhand speculation or anonymous leaks. It was a direct admission from the inside. Unbeknownst to the room, a journalist seated just 3 chairs away had come prepared. Hidden beneath his tailored blazer was a concealed microphone. He'd been tipped off days earlier that something might slip during the Geneva gathering. But even he hadn't expected this level of exposure. The recording captured every word, the laughter, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that no one would ever hear about it. But someone did. The audio was discreetly encrypted and sent to Clarence's house not through press channels or digital leaks, but through diplomatic couriers. That's how serious it had become. The monarchy wasn't just dealing with a rogue family member. They were facing a full-blown operation designed to destabilize and defame. When William and Charles sat down to hear the tape, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. What they heard confirmed what the contract had only suggested. This was no longer about personal betrayal. This was about institutional sabotage, about image, about legacy, about defense. There was no more hiding behind royal etiquette or diplomatic restraint. The gloves were off, and for the first time, father and son were united in what needed to happen next. Still, they needed to look Meghan in the eyes and confront her with the truth. She walked in expecting diplomacy. She left stripped of everything. The invitation had been carefully worded, an official request for Meghan to meet at Clarence's house to discuss mental health initiatives and upcoming charitable engagements. On the surface, it looked like an olive branch, a gesture toward unity. What awaited her, however, was anything but. The room was quiet when she arrived. No aides, no smiles. Just William and Charles. Meghan, still poised, took her seat completely unaware that the next few minutes would define the rest of her public life. William didn't waste time with pleasantries. He reached forward, pressed play, and let the evidence speak for itself. The first clip was subtle, a dinner conversation that had been aired nearly word for word in the Netflix series. Meghan's voice, captured candidly, overlapped perfectly with the scripted line in the documentary. Her expression stiffened. The second clip was harder. Footage of Princess Charlotte arriving at school, recorded from an unauthorized angle. The implication was clear. That moment had been filmed without consent and weaponized for media drama. Meghan shifted, her hands now gripped, tightly together, but she said nothing. Then came the third and the most devastating, a private exchange between William and Harry, filled with grief after the Queen's passing. Their bond, their vulnerability, laid bare for the world. It was the final wound. Still, Meghan didn't apologize. She straightened herself and said, "I was telling my truth." The phrase landed like a blade. William leaned in, his voice sharp and unshaking. "No," he replied. "You sold our silence. You packaged our pain." His eyes never left hers. This wasn't a confrontation fueled by rage. It was driven by heartbreak. Charles, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. His words were short, direct, and final. Meghan would no longer hold her royal titles. No further invitations would come. Her security detail would be withdrawn, and her involvement in official royal events was finished. "We cannot protect what undermines the crown," he said quietly. The verdict was not shouted. It didn't need to be. Meghan stood up. She looked at them both. No tears, no defiance, just a blank, measured silence. And then, without a single word, she turned and walked out of Clarence's house for the last time. What she thought would be a conversation turned into an erasure. What she believed was a bridge became a border. But behind this tense meeting was a royal hand that no one saw coming. She saw it coming. Before she passed, she wrote her final protection plan. In the days following Meghan's departure from Clarence's house, the royal corridors were filled with whispers. But one voice rose above them all, not spoken aloud, but read. It came from a sealed envelope stored deep within the royal vault, bearing nothing but the Queen's initials. The letter had been written months before her death, in her own hand, and addressed solely to Charles and William. It was never meant to be released to the public, but its content would define the monarchy's response to everything that followed. The words were measured, as always, but this time, there was something else warning. She wrote of the wolves within, those who would trade crowns for cameras, and reminded them that royalty is not inherited through blood alone, but upheld through dignity. Her lines didn't mention names, but they didn't have to. The message was chillingly clear. Protect the family, protect the crown, and never mistake silence for peace. What struck William most wasn't just what she wrote. It was the tone. Not bitterness, not vengeance, but foresight. She had seen the fracture long before it cracked. She had seen the charm and charisma that could mask ambition. And above all, she had known that eventually, someone within the palace walls would choose fame over family. So, she gave her son and grandson something more powerful than any title, moral authority, not to retaliate in rage, but to act in preservation. The letter was never published, but small excerpts were quietly quoted in private palace briefings. Her phrase, "The monarchy must never bow to a camera lens," was repeated behind closed doors like scripture. For William, her words became a shield. They gave him clarity where confusion once ruled. Every decision that followed, from the removal of titles to the tightening of royal protocols, was rooted not in emotion, but in her legacy. Charles, too, was moved in a way he hadn't anticipated. In public, he carried on as king, but in private, he held that letter like a compass. His mother had passed the torch not just of duty, but of discernment. It wasn't just a letter. It was a royal will not of wealth, but of wisdom. William later told a close aide, "Her voice is louder now than when she was alive." Because in that quiet document, the Queen hadn't just protected the monarchy from scandal, she had protected its soul. She had written the final word in a story still unfolding. Still, one figure remained in the shadows, caught between love, truth, and tragedy. He didn't plan the betrayal, but he couldn't stop it either. Prince Harry had always walked a tightrope between duty and defiance, tradition and truth. But as the documentary spiraled into a global firestorm, it became clear he had surrendered more than just his royal status. He had surrendered control. During post-production, when the most intimate decisions were being made, what to include, what to cut, how far to go, Harry was conspicuously absent. He missed most review meetings. Whether by choice or emotional withdrawal, he left Meghan to shape the narrative. And that silence came at a cost. Behind the scenes, producers grew more emboldened. With Meghan at the helm, raw grief was sculpted into spectacle. One moment, in particular, sent shockwaves through the palace, a private clip of William mourning in the quiet hours following the Queen's passing. Harry had once insisted it be excluded. He argued with Meghan, pleading for it to be removed, but the footage stayed. And once it aired, something irreversible fractured between the brothers. William didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any confrontation. He had begged for protection, and Harry had given them exposure. For William, the betrayal wasn't just in what Harry allowed, it was in what he didn't stop. Desperate for resolution, Harry tried using intermediaries, mutual friends, family confidants, even a few royal staffers. But every message sent was met with guarded distance or no reply at all. It wasn't anger William held onto. It was disappointment. The kind that doesn't shout it, erodes. And soon, Harry found himself in a place neither side could reach. Isolated in a world built on carefully constructed interviews and orchestrated appearances, Harry was no longer part of either empire. Meghan's media machine, now vast and strategic, operated without him. And the monarchy, the institution that had once defined his very identity, had closed its gates for good. He didn't belong to either narrative. He drifted in between them, misunderstood by both, trusted by neither. To the public, Harry remained visible. But inside, he had become the most invisible figure of all, a man caught between two truths, two families, and two versions of himself. He didn't plan the betrayal, but he became the face of it. But even as Harry stayed behind, Meghan wasn't finished. This wasn't just a documentary. It was a revolution with Meghan at the helm. In the weeks after the royal fallout, Meghan didn't retreat. She expanded. What many assumed would be a pause in her public presence turned into an aggressive acceleration. With contracts in place and doors wide open, Meghan secured powerhouse PR deals with firms like WME and Sunshine Sachs, names known not just for protecting images, but for shaping empires. This wasn't about recovering from backlash. It was about taking control of the narrative before anyone else could. She launched a new wave of content under her personal brand first, with curated podcasts that blurred the line between therapy and theater. Then with a book deal that promised revelations, but delivered reinvention. Docudramas followed, each one carefully stylized to soften her edges while sharpening her stance. Meghan no longer played the victim of the monarchy. She became its foil, its disruptor, its challenger. The stories weren't rewritten, they were reframed. The crown wasn't the villain. It was the symbol she had outgrown. Every interview, every magazine cover, every panel appearance was timed like clockwork. They didn't just respond to headlines, they anticipated them. When the palace made a statement, Meghan was already on the next platform with a counter. When criticism grew online, new footage emerged to steer sympathy back in her direction. Her media machine didn't blink, it moved. Strategically, mercilessly, and always forward. Behind the scenes, her team functioned like a war room. They weren't just handling publicity, they were managing perception. Editors, consultants, legals, strategists, even social media psychologists, all working in lockstep to ensure the message never fractured. When damaging stories leaked, they were drowned out by a flurry of new press. When contradictions emerged, silence became a shield. And when questions were asked about the deeper motivations behind the Netflix expose, the answers were always polished, but never clear. Because the truth was never really about fame. Meghan had already had that. The real prize was bigger, more personal. She wasn't looking to be adored. She was aiming to dismantle the system that rejected her. The one that questioned her identity. The one that underestimated her influence. The one that crowned her with a title, then clipped her voice the moment she tried to use it. What the palace viewed as betrayal, Meghan viewed as emancipation. Every step, every headline, every episode part of a larger strategy to outlast the institution itself. Now, all that remained was to accept the final fallout. The doors didn't slam shut. They closed quietly with finality, without fanfare, without warning. Buckingham Palace released a short, surgically crafted statement to the world. No emotion, no names, just a declaration. All official ties with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, were now formally severed. Titles rescinded, duties dissolved, privileges revoked. The message was clear: it was over. Not with rage, with resolve. But Meghan, ever calculated, didn't wait long. Her response came within hours, not in bitterness, but in composed defiance. A brief message to her followers, wrapped in grace, but edged with fire. The world knows. She didn't need to explain. She didn't clarify. She left it hanging an open-ended truth, only she claimed to hold. And just like that, the war of silence became a war of symbols. Then came William. His words, quiet but piercing, reached the press through an unnamed source close to the palace. The truth is what history will remember. Not loud, not angry, just permanent. He didn't counter her narrative. He didn't name her, but the line drew itself in the sand. Meghan had chosen her story. The monarchy had chosen its legacy. Across the globe, media outlets scrambled to decode the tension. Analysts framed the palace's move as a strategic reclamation of identity, one that reasserted control over a family long torn by spectacle. Some called it a victory for tradition. Others mourned the death of a new modern chapter. But inside the palace walls, it wasn't strategy. It was survival. Harry remained silent. No statement, no denial, no defense. That silence spoke volumes. It was the final fracture in a bond already frayed by betrayal, confusion, and absence. His refusal to take a side deepened the mystery. Had he been broken by it all? Or was he still waiting, somewhere between loyalty and loss? Behind the gates of Buckingham Palace, the firm adjusted. Calendars were reshuffled. Press protocols were rewritten. Staff moved forward. But something intangible had shifted forever. The memory of this rupture of what was shared and what was stolen would linger long after the headlines faded. Trust, once breached in daylight, cannot be rebuilt in the dark. And so the gates closed not to punish, not to protect, but to preserve what was left. The institution didn't collapse. It didn't roar. It simply moved on. And in doing so, left behind a name that would echo louder outside its walls than it ever did within them. She tried to tell the world her truth, but in doing so, she crossed the one line the monarchy could never forgive. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.